Welcome to the new edition of World Today, Gaza during Ramadan, where the spirit of fasting intertwines with the struggle for survival. Stay tuned for an in-depth look at the intersection of faith, resilience, and hardship, right here on World Today.
As Ramadan began, Palestinians marked the start of the holy month in a somber mood amid heightened security by Israeli police and the looming threat of war and hunger in Gaza, overshadowing the normally festive period as ceasefire talks stalled. Thousands of police were deployed in the narrow streets of Jerusalem's Old City, where tens of thousands of worshippers are expected daily at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of Islam's holiest sites. The area, considered the most sacred place by Jews as the Temple Mount, has long been a flashpoint for violence and was one of the starting points of last year's war between Israel and Hamas, the militant group controlling Gaza. That 10-day conflict pales in comparison to the current war, now in its sixth month since Hamas fighters invaded Israel on October 7, killing some 1,200 by Israeli estimates. Israel's relentless Gaza campaign has sparked growing international alarm as the risk of famine poses a threat to the death toll, which has surpassed 31,000. After initial confusion when hardline Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir proposed restrictions at Al-Aqsa, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu clarified that worshipper numbers would be similar to last year. "This is our mosque and we must care for it," said Azam al-Khatib, head of the Jerusalem Waqf that oversees Al-Aqsa. "We must protect the presence of Muslims at this mosque, who should be able to enter peacefully and safely in large numbers." As Ramadan begins, Palestinians in Jerusalem and across the Middle East mark the start of the Islamic holy month of fasting. However, in Gaza, fierce fighting continues between Israeli forces and Hamas militants, making this Ramadan starkly different. With humanitarian ceasefires unsuccessful so far, Gaza faces a dire situation, with aid agencies warning of potential mass starvation. The UN says 25% of Gazans are at risk of starvation, with Gaza's health ministry reporting 23 malnutrition deaths, mostly children. On the first day of Ramadan, Gazans made an effort to uphold traditions like singing and lighting lanterns, but with empty fridges and pantries, a simple can of beans for iftar is now an impossibility. Gazans lament the lack of a ceasefire and the ongoing fighting, as Israel's prime minister reiterates plans to invade Rafah. Meanwhile, an aid ship loaded with relief supplies remains docked in Cyprus, delayed in its mission to reach Gaza by sea. Aid agencies continue to underscore that current aid flows into Gaza are drastically insufficient to meet critical needs. Allowing comprehensive aid access by road seems the most efficient solution, but with only limited crossings open and an unstable environment, distributing aid in Gaza remains extremely challenging. As a result, the world continues to push for a humanitarian ceasefire that would facilitate getting aid to the suffering population during this holy month. Hopes for a ceasefire that would have allowed Gazans to observe Ramadan in peace and enabled the return of Israeli hostages held in Gaza appear dashed as talks in Cairo stall. A Hamas official said the group remains open to negotiations but no new talks have been scheduled. During a visit to Qatar, International Committee of the Red Cross President Mirjana Spoljaric discussed the dire humanitarian situation with Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh and Qatari officials, as the Red Cross tries to engage all sides. In Gaza, where half the population is crammed into Rafah, the mood is bleak. "We made no Ramadan preparations because we've been fasting for 5 months, said Aisha, a mother of 4 who would normally decorate her home and stock up on food. With prices skyrocketing, she relies on canned goods and rice. UNRWA lamented that Ramadan should bring a ceasefire for the suffering, not more hunger, displacement and fear. 13 displaced people perished in an Israeli strike in al-Mawasi. In the West Bank, cities brace for more violence amid the surge since the Gaza war. Israel has heightened security over attack fears. Still, Gazans hope for peace. "Despite everything, we will welcome Ramadan with prayers, fasting and steadfast patience," said Mohammed al-Salah, a displaced Gazan. Ramadan usually brings joyful celebrations, but this year in Gaza, the holy month arrives amid war, displacement, and starvation, said Ahmed Hassan, a street vendor who recalled past Ramadans fondly. With homes destroyed, families separated, and hunger pervasive, observing Ramadan traditions will be difficult, but people are doing what they can to maintain their faith despite the hardship. President Biden issued a statement on Sunday night marking the start of Ramadan and calling for increased humanitarian aid and a ceasefire in Gaza. He expressed sympathy for the terrible suffering inflicted on Palestinians, noting that over 30,000 have been killed, mostly civilians including children. Nearly 2 million have been displaced and are in need of food, water and shelter. Biden reiterated the U.S. commitment to provide aid via airdrops and building a temporary pier in Gaza. He said the U.S. will work towards an immediate 6-week ceasefire deal that releases hostages, with the long-term goal of stability, security and peace. The statement comes as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has political significance domestically, with some Arab American and progressive voters signaling discontent over U.S. policy. Biden also condemned the appalling resurgence of hate and violence toward Muslim Americans. International hopes of brokering a ceasefire in Gaza before Ramadan were dashed on Sunday, as Hamas reiterated demands that Israel rejected. Mediators from Egypt, Qatar, and the U.S. had aimed to negotiate a truce between Israel and Hamas prior to the start of the Holy Month on Monday. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh said Hamas sought an end to fighting, Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and the return of displaced Palestinians. He signaled flexibility on prisoner swaps if Israel committed to these goals. Israel stated it must eliminate Hamas's governing abilities in Gaza before ending the war and seeks to recover hostages from an October attack. On Friday, intelligence heads from Israel and the U.S. met to advance a hostage deal, though gaps remain. Hamas was accused of inflaming Gaza at the expense of Palestinians. Some in Gaza criticized Hamas for delaying negotiations to press Israel on prisoners. In an interview, Israeli PM Netanyahu suggested a ceasefire wasn't imminent absent a release. He said, "Without a release, there's not going to be a pause in the fighting."